Many people are surprised that China has accepted a huge $10 trillion, $1.4 trillion, debt plan to help its failing economy. This is especially true for the United States, which has been dealing with its own economic problems and Donald Trump's return to the White House. Over the next 3 years, Finance Minister Lan Fan will hold press conferences to talk about the details of this huge loan deal. Regional governments will be able to borrow up to $6 trillion, which is about $838 billion, to pay off their secret debt, which is usually held by risky platforms for supporting local governments. In addition, over the next 5 years, local governments will be able to use a separate $4 trillion, $558 billion, limit for special local bonds. This will help them pay off even more debt. Although the $1.4 trillion were meant to be standard stimulus, 60% of them were given through a scheme that will allow local governments to issue new bonds over 3 years, starting this year, to pay off what the government calls hidden debt. This kind of debt, which isn't shown on the balance sheet or isn't known, has been a major source of risk in the economy. Also, over the next 5 years, local governments will be able to sell more special bonds to raise money for the same reason. Over the next 5 years, the indirect boost will free up $85 billion. China made this extreme move because its economy has been having a hard time since the beginning of 2023. Central and local government earnings have not been as high as hoped because of years of strict pandemic limits and the crushing real estate crisis. Local governments have lost a lot of money because of this, and now they have to deal with huge amounts of debt and few resources to boost economic growth. In some places, the problem is so bad that governments can't provide basic services anymore, and the risk of failures is going up. Larry, who is the chief China economist at McCaw Bank, thinks that the size of the debt swap is bigger than expected. However, he thinks that the National People's Congress will not agree to a huge fiscal plan. The policy goal is not to really boost the economy, but to meet the GDP growth target and lower threats. Lan Fan, China's finance minister, has said again that the country's economy needs more help. The plan has rules to help the government buy houses that haven't been sold, take back unused land for homes from developers, and give big state banks more cash. However, there isn't a direct boost that helps businesses and customers directly raise demand. Many experts say that China's economy needs bigger consumer support because of high youth unemployment, low wages, and a weak social safety net that keep people from spending much. The US and other countries put taxes on China's exports. The amount of money that Chinese households spend is less than 40% of their GDP, which is 20% less than the average around the world. Some analysts think that Beijing is probably holding off on some support until Trump's policies toward China are clearer. Different things have happened in the market after China announced its debt plan. Others were unhappy that there weren't more details on how the government could spend more money to directly boost the economy, while others had hoped for help in buying property stocks. After the news, the yuan fell against the dollar, and East Asian stocks originally went up but then went down. Instead of directly boosting demand in China, Beijing has announced a plan to control risk and keep the economy stable so it doesn't fall any further. The biggest problem the Chinese economy is facing right now is deflation, and Beijing doesn't like giving money to people. The Chinese government thinks that it would make people more lazy. Now, investors are very interested in the December meeting of the Polluter Bureau and the Central Economic Work Conference. These events should give investors more information about how the US will handle trade and China's budget strategy. The debt deal was announced just a few days after Trump was re-elected. The president has also promised to put taxes of up to 60% on Chinese goods, which will make things more unclear and make China's economic problems during his first term harder to solve. As it becomes clearer how the US will handle trade, China may not significantly increase support until it knows exactly what Trump will do. Some people who are against China's debt plan point out its flaws, like the fact that it focuses on steps to reduce supply instead of increasing demand at home. This method might make industry overcapacity and trade conflicts worse without boosting demand. Producers can't get rid of their stock when exports go down, because that would cut into their income and make private investment or efforts to boost local demand less likely. China's government has been using stimulus programs to increase domestic spending, lower the number of homes for sale, and reveal secret loans. But the plan isn't as big as some people thought it would be, and Trump's tax threats are only about 0.5% of GDP per year. During the 2008 crisis, this was much higher than 10% of GDP. China needs more than 23 trillion yuan to get rid of its housing stock and secret debts, and the market is likely to be let down by the steps it announced on Friday. Most of the money goes to building and maintaining land, not helping people directly. Increasing investment helps jobs and incomes grow slowly, but families don't get the money directly like they did in the US company stimulus. China's growth this year has been driven in part by increasing exports, so U.S study group says that taxes could have a big effect on Chinese goods. If the Trump administration puts a 30% tax on all Chinese goods, China's GDP growth will slow by 0.3 to 0.4 percentage points over the next 2 years. If the Republicans take over Congress, on the other hand, there is a greater chance that the tariff will go up and happen much earlier. This means that China's exports will be at a big disadvantage next year, in 2026. It is very important for the government to keep market expectations in check, especially when it comes to foreign investment and events happening in the country. The second top goal is to lower the level of routine risk in the local government and the banks industry. China's surprise 10 trillion yuan UN debt relief plan for local governments is a big move, but many experts think it's not enough to jumpstart the slow economy, especially when it comes to increasing customer demand. The Gintong underwater tube is another important part of the recovery measures. It will cut the journey time between Ningbo and Zhou to 26 minutes. This big project is the start of a new era for China's high-speed rail. It will be the world's largest underwater high-speed train tube, measuring 16.18 kilometers in length. The 77 kilometers Ningbo-Zhou railway includes the Gintong underwater tunnel project. It should be finished by the end of 2026 and open for business by 2028. It will connect the towns of Ningbo and Zhan to China's large high-speed train network. When it's finished, it will be the biggest tunnel of its kind in the world. With the tunnel, the trip between Ningbo and Zhan will only take 26 minutes instead of 1.5 hours. This will speed up their merger into the Yangtze River commercial belt. The tunnel has to deal with a lot of technical problems, such as finding its way through complicated navigation routes and anchorages, working under very high water pressure, and keeping its accuracy while digging over a long distance. Overcoming these problems will take the highest level of tech skill and creative answers. The engineers working on the Gintong underwater tunnel have used a variety of building methods, such as the tried-and-true Andrew cut-and-cover method and the amazing shield tunneling machines. With 308 specially made tools, the Dinghai colossal tunnel boring machine is the biggest machine of its kind in the world. It is 135 meters long and weighs 4,350 tons. There is no doubt that the tube will be able to cut through the rough rock below the East China Sea. The Huizhou is a very amazing tunnel boring machine that is working on the Ningbo side of the tunnel to make sure the project stays on track to be finished by 2028 as planned. The Gintong is going to be the world's third longest underwater train tunnel, after Japan's Seon Tunnel and the UK-France Channel Tunnel. The tunnels are currently the largest undersea tunnels in the world. However, the Gintong underwater tunnel is special because it was built for high-speed rail, which means that trains can go as fast as 250 km/h through the East China Sea. China has more than 70% of the world's high-speed train networks, which has changed how people get around and connect with each other. It is believed that the tunnel will completely change the lives of the people who live in these two towns by connecting them to the bigger high-speed train network that runs all the way across China. China is a world star in building and transportation, and it wants to add more high-speed train lines to its network. China is eager to push the limits of what's possible in the world of high-speed rail, and the Gintong underwater tube is just the latest part of this ongoing story. Along the way, the $200 billion underground train network would go through Siberia, Alaska, and Canada on its way from mainland China to the United States. This project is so big that it would dwarf even the biggest technical projects. It will set a new standard for connecting people around the world. When the plan was first announced in 2014, it got a lot of attention from the media. Some say, though, that this project's possibility has been put on hold. This shows China's constant desire and readiness to push the limits of what's possible. The Gintong underwater tube is not just a pipe dream. The project is already well underway, with drilling work already going strong offshore. The Dinghai, the world's biggest and strongest tunnel boring machine, has crossed the seawall and is at the center of this huge project. The next step will be to build on the water, which will be even more difficult. Through the tunnel, the Ningbo-Zhou line will go under a busy shipping lane in the East China Sea. Vessels up to 100,000 tons will use this lane. When it opened in January, it was called the world's longest high-speed train tunnel. It was thought that the 4,350-ton Dinghai was the world's largest and biggest marine tunnel. Some of the world's biggest and strongest dams can be found in China, which has also made big progress in hydropower. This is a clear sign that the country wants to find long-term energy answers and is ready to take on even the biggest technical tasks. Japan's big maglev project in the mountains shows us what transportation will be like in the future. The 43 kilometers magnetic lift train track that defies gravity is not made up. It is based on years of study and complex engineering. Magnetic lifting technology looks like something from the future, but it's still not very useful in the real world. At the moment, there is only one daily business high-speed maglev line that runs. It is called the Shanghai Maglev, and it connects Ping International Airport to the edges of Shanghai's financial area. Conventional high-speed rail networks use an amazing 60,000 kilometers of track around the world. In just 20 years, China has built over 40,000 kilometers of these lines. Maglev technology has been around since the 1970s and is used in high-speed train systems all over the world. But it has only been used in a few countries, like Shanghai and Germany, because it is expensive to maintain and doesn't always work right. Even more interesting is Japan's current maglev project, which is not only building a new train line but also putting money into a technology that has had a hard time becoming popular in the business world. The first method used in Shanghai is electromagnetic suspension, which uses magnetic forces to pull the train up. To do this, there must be a perfect 8 to 12 mm gap between the track and the train. Japan went a different way. They made a 10 cm gap that was 8 times bigger than Shanghai's and used magnetic resistance to make stable flight. Another option is the pulse tube refrigerator system. It keeps temperatures very low without using any moving parts in the cold area, which makes it more stable and less likely to break down. Using careful time and heat exchange, the system turns helium gas into pressure waves that move back and forth between hot and cold areas. These waves are similar to sound waves. However, these superconducting coils make magnetic fields that are strong enough to damage credit cards, mess up pacemakers, and pull metal items toward them. Engineers came up with a complex filtering solution using electric steel that has 3% silicon in it to solve this problem. It is possible for this steel to conduct magnetic fields because its crystal structure is aligned in certain ways during processing. The steel goes through a complicated cold rolling process that makes big crystal grains that are lined up in the right way. These grains can carry about 30% more magnetic flux in the direction that engineers want, so they can precisely control where the magnetic fields run. In the passenger areas, the effects are amazing, but the magnetic field strength drops to just 0.5 militesla, which is about the same as Earth's natural magnetic field. Special care needs to be taken with the tracks because the strong magnets would pull typical steel lines toward them, causing unwanted forces and interference. The system's guideway frame is made of a mix of low magnetic steel and fiber-reinforced composites. These materials keep their shape while being magnetically neutral. Finally, maglev technology seems like a good idea for high-speed train systems, but it has problems with upkeep, dependability, and working with current systems.